We can't talk about soft skills in science without talking about science communication. And to illustrate this point, I'm going to take you back to the 1940s. Alexander Fleming made the discovery of penicillin, but he couldn't purify it. It wasn't until almost 10, 15 years later where a couple of other scientists, Howard Florey and Ernst Chain, they were able to purify the penicillin enough for it to be stable and enough for it to be able to be bottled up to be sent off to do some more clinical trials, because you don't want to just use a bit of mold secreted drug and start adding it to patients and help treat their skin infections without some kind of testing in place. So Florey and Chain were able to distill it and purify it to a point where it was stable enough to be able to test it on more people. This was against the backdrop of the 1940s where World War II was happening and raging. They were dying from wound infections. So something like penicillin, designed to kill the bacteria that live on the skin, could save millions and millions of Allied troops' lives. To be able to service millions of soldiers, they weren't able to do it at the University of Oxford, where they were doing their initial experiments. Florey and Chain needed to partner with Big Pharma in the US to massively upscale the production of penicillin. And what Florey walked into was actually a hornet's nest of internal politicking, because the big pharma companies that he went to talk to in the US, many of them were already working on their own version of penicillin. And there was this competitive jealousy or competitive suspicion. Also, they were coming from the UK, and these companies wanted to make money. They wanted to be able to use their own pipeline of penicillin and purify it and make a lot of money and help their country survive the war. Florey's scientific expertise, in that he already had a ready-to-go penicillin, actually made the situation worse. It wasn't his hard skill of scientific bona fides that convinced these pharma companies to put down their corporate espionage minds and to really collaborate with Florey. It was his ability to communicate, to engage with stakeholders, to engage with politicians that formed the task group with the US government and industry in different parts of Great Britain to really allow the exchange of ideas between these competing industries. This was what led to the massification of penicillin production. It was Florey's communication skills, the soft skill rather than his hard skill, that really allowed this chapter in history to get across the line and for penicillin to be mass produced to get across D-Day and win the wars, essentially. How can you learn the communication skills to be able to survive, hopefully not in that kind of life and death World War situation, but just survive in your next pitch for a grant or your next job interview? It comes down to getting the reps. Being able to teach and give lectures was the biggest advantage, because this is how most academics talk to the most number of people, and teaching students and getting feedback on that process is one of the most effective ways. Getting teaching opportunities is not that easy to do. Certainly if you're a young academic, a young early career researcher, public speaking opportunities are far and few between. One of the best ways of doing this is something that I've been advocating for recently, is to join conversation classes. My local library every weekend runs a conversation class for people where English is either their second language or it's an additional language that they speak, and they're looking to speak to people who are native English speakers, or I guess it doesn't have to be English, it can be any other language. Go talk to people. In fact, you can sign up to some services, whether it be through Skillshare or other of these online platforms where it's kind of like an online tutoring conglomerate. Your job is just to sit there and talk to them, and you could use that in any way you want. You can either ask them questions or you can respond to the questions they ask of you, and keeping that conversation going, this kind of communication speed dating, a forcing function to deliberately hack your way to become better at this art and skill of communication.